Hello, I'm Chandu Nair, handling the course on marketing management. Today we're going to talk about consumer behavior. Behavior is a very fascinating area in general, and for marketers the area of consumer behavior is a very fascinating subject. So I think without any further ado, let's get on with what we're going to cover in this chapter. At the end of this chapter, you will be able to understand and also relate it to your own experiences at each stage, which is what factors motivate an individual to buy. There are so many types of motivations and reasons why people buy, what are the various roles that we have, the types of buying situations, and so on and so forth. Secondly, how do people get the information they need to make a purchase decision with respect to a product or a brand? Third, what is the relative importance attached by decision makers to various aspects of a product? Fourthly, what is the set of competing products from which consumers make their final choice? So are you part of the consideration set? How do people arrive at the consideration set are aspects that we can consider. Who all are involved in the decision making process? How long does the process of a decision take? And what are the implications of such behavior on marketing decisions? Now, what I would request you to do is try and relate all what we are going to take into account today and in almost every chapter with your own personal experiences with the people around you. Observe and correlate, because that's how you will understand the reality behind the various concepts being addressed in this course. Now, when you understand consumer buying processes, you as a marketer can end up being more successful, have the potential for greater success. Why? Because marketing management or marketing mix management focuses firstly and foremostly on the company's perspective. But many times what happens is that customers may see what you're offering in a completely different manner. Why do they see it in such a way? Why does your communication go differently from what you intended? Are things that you as a marketer must try and understand a lot better. So what happens is there is that moment of truth when the customer makes a purchase decision. So months of planning and execution may just be determined by that final decision that the customer takes, and it may all go to waste if it happens in the manner which you did not expect. Now, if you take a consumer, there are various roles that happen with the customer. One is the person who initiates the buying process. There can be several people involved, or it could be the same person sometimes rolled into all these roles. But the first and foremost is the person who determines that there is some need or want and authorizes a purchase or initiates the purchase. You can relate it to your own situation. For example, if you take, for example, what should a child eat for breakfast? Now the child may say, today I feel like having cereal of some sort. Now he may be the one who's initiating it. The second one is a person who influences the choice. It could be a pediatrician who says, for this growing child, given this child's exercise patterns and his nutritional needs, these are the kind of food items that you should be looking at as breakfast. So that can play a considerable role in the choice of the food that's served for breakfast. Third is the person who actually goes and buys it. Typically one might expect that it is the housewife, but today it so happens sometimes people might go as a family and buy things together in a grocery store, and there is the kid also who might play the actual role of going and picking up that box and putting it in the shopping basket. And finally is the person who actually uses it, which is, we go back to the child itself in the case of a cereal, who may actually be the actual consumer. Now there are several roles that you can see here, and actually some of these roles can be even added on to other roles. For example, there could be somebody who prepares something, who puts other things along with it. For example, if you take cereals, the mother might actually add some fruits along with it. So there are other secondary and other roles as well. So therefore, there is a very interesting framework that has been developed to understand this in a composite perspective, and that's the 7 O's framework. As you've seen with almost all of marketing, and almost any subject for that matter, if you typically answer the 5 W's and 1 H, who, what, when, where, why and how, you can understand a framework or a situation or a context much better. Similarly, in this particular case of consumer behavior, the 7 O's framework, which first and foremost talks about the occupant, which is who is the person out there in the marketplace. Typically, it's the consumer. 2 is the object, which is what is being purchased, and that is really the product or product offerings that are out there. Third is the objective. What need or want does the customer seek to satisfy by buying this particular object? 4 is the occasion, which is when does the customer buy? Is it a special situation? How often does he buy? Things like that. Then comes the outlet, which is where does he buy it from and why does he go there to buy that thing? Then is the operations, which is what all is involved in making sure that all these various constituents are actually meeting and concluding a transaction. And 7 is the organizations, who all are involved in making this happen. So as you can see, by actually slicing and dicing this and understanding the roles of each of these different O's, one can get a much better understanding of what all happens with respect to consumer behavior, because all of them in some manner or the other impinge on behavior. Similarly, one can classify customer behavior in terms of whether it's a high involvement purchase situation or a low involvement purchase situation on the one side, along with whether the alternatives are seen to have significant difference or the alternatives are seen not to have much of a difference. So if you take a very high involvement product, okay, but the alternatives are not seen as having much of a difference. For many people, if you take males, the act of shaving might be a fairly routine activity. For most people, the choice of shaving creams might be restricted to 3-4 key brands, but they may not really see much of a difference between the various brands. So, and if the prices also seem to be more or less in the same range, then the real objective of the customer would be to just reduce a dissonance and make up his mind between the couple of the 2-3 products that he has in mind. So let's take a look at each of these. Now here, like I mentioned, he does not see much difference between the competing key brands, especially those in his consideration set. So his real thing is, while he is involved because it's on his skin, etc., he is not too particularly enamored by the differences between the brands, and therefore he will really look at maybe price to some extent. If especially there's not much of a difference, he doesn't mind choosing anything, and therefore he'll choose a brand which reduces the dissonance. So he will look at information, because suppose he finds that there is some problem about some ingredient which might affect his skin, he may not look at that. So then the marketer's role perhaps in such cases where there is high involvement but not much differentiation seen between the brands is to see whether he can come up with some clarity in terms of differentiating his product offering so that the customer chooses his offering over the other products.